from whichever part of the world you have joined from. You're just waiting for a few more people to join in. Which will start in the next 1 minute. Hey, Nicholas. EM.
I recognize Nicholas from Basecamp course that we do also to onboard developers.
Sweet. I think we can kick off. So, hey everyone, and welcome to the first workshop for StarkHack, titled Counter Workshop. Joining us today is David, who will be taking us through the session. And with that, I'll pass it over to David to get the workshop started.
Yeah. Hi. My name is David Barreto. I'm a developer advocate at the Starknet Foundation. So my role is basic education. So what I prepared for you today is just a very introductory workshop to try to show you the basics of a smart contract written in Cairo. And hopefully we're gonna have enough time to deploy it also to testnet so you can see the deployment process. I'm gonna share my screen. We only have half an hour, so Calvin, please let me know about the time because this usually a workshop takes longer. So we take it as far as we can. So we were going to be doing this workshop. Give me a second to move things out of the way. Right. So this is the link. I put it on the chat on the Zoom. People on YouTube, you can actually just type this on search bar and just find it. It's under the Starknet EDU username called the Counter Workshop. And the idea here is just simple, right? Just create a simple counter smart contract where you can define an initial value for a counter and increment it every time you call it and read the current value from storage as well. So we are going to start. Give me a second. Right. So we need some basic tooling. Increase the font size here. So the first tool that we need is obviously is to have Git installed. So just to check, I have Git 2.39. We are also going to be using Docker, so we have all the dependencies all at once. You can install dependencies individually, just going through the documentation of Cairo using with the Scarp. For example, if you go to Scarp is going to be the tool that we're going to use for development. And here you're going to find instructions to how to install all the dependencies one by one, but I have a Docker image that has all the dependencies all at once. So I'm going to be using that. So make sure that you have Docker also running. In my case, it's running. And finally, I'm going to be using VS Code, mostly because, open source, free, and it has some extensions that are going to be very useful for Cairo. So just to check as well that I have it, VS Code, in this case, just code version. All right. So I have my 3 dependencies. So first step, I'm just going to go to some folder for work. This is where I normally work. And I'm going to clone the repository for the workshop. So as I mentioned, this is the link for the workshop. And I'm just going to clone it here. So I go back to my Git clone, paste it. And there we have it. I'm going to get into the folder. I'm going to open it in my editor and make sure the font size is big enough. All right. First thing you notice is that it's just going to, if you have this extension, you will need to have the dev container extensions on your VS Code, so it's able to actually open an instance of VS Code within a container that has all the dependencies that you need. In this case, we need to have a Scarp, the package manager for Cairo, and we need to have a Starknet Foundry because this workshop is based on some tests that you need to pass in order to say, okay, I'm completed the steps and I'm ready to move on to the next one. And you can also have the Cairo 1 syntax highlighter developed by Starknet Industries. So make sure you have Cairo 1.0 because there's an older version of Cairo that also have an extension, but it's different language, like an old version of the language. So make sure you have this one as well. So when you have dev containers, what's going to happen is that our starting point for the workshop doesn't have much. It just have some, actually just basic, just the Docker basically, right? And the dev container file. So I can reopen this in the container. When you have the dev container extension, you're going to have this command. So you're going to rebuild the image and reopen in VS Code. So we wait for this to Docker to take over. So when it's completed, now in the integrated terminal, you will be able to actually have access to Scarp. And we can check that Scarp version, right? So we have Scarp 2.6.4. That includes Cairo 2.6.3 and Sierra 1.5.0. The other tool that I mentioned is Starknet Foundry, and in particular, Starknet Foundry has two tools within them. One is a test runner, which is called async forge, and one is a command line to interact with the Starknet called cast. So I'm just going to be using async forge for this tutorial indirectly. So async forge version, just to make sure that is everything correctly. Yes, so I have async forge 0.23.0. So now clear here, I'm just gonna then look in the instructions of the workshop to see what is that we're supposed to be doing and trying to close the, oh, okay. All right. So if you follow the workshop, and by the way, if we don't have time to finish it on here live, you can just finish it at home as well. You have all the steps here. So we just completed the setup using Docker, right? So we have all the dependencies with dev containers. So now we can actually start with step one. And for each step, you're going to have to switch to a particular branch just to activate the unit test for that section. So we're going to first go to the step one. So git check out step one, right? I have this active. And what it's asking us to do, it says, the goal is to initialize the project structure within the clone repository by using the Scarp package manager and enable compilation of the Starknet contracts. So one of the requirements is that we need to initialize the package with the name counter. And this is important because the tests are expecting the package to be called counter. Create a new Cairo file on the source directory, name counter. So let's go step by step. So let's do this one. Let's create a new project using Scarp for the folder that we're in. And we do that by going back to the command line. Give me a second. Right. So with the Scarp installed, you can do a Scarp init, and then you give it a name with the flag name. I'm just going to call the package counter, right? So Scarp init is just going to create all the folders and files that we need to create a Scarp project that is able to handle Cairo, and it's just going to give it a name, in this case counter. If you don't provide this flag, it's just going to default to the name of the folder that you have this workshop on. So as you can see, it created a new source folder called that has one file, lib.cairo. This is just a basic Cairo file. This is just like a vanilla Cairo because you can use Cairo on its own, or you can use Cairo to write smart contracts for a Starknet. So this is the example that it comes with, and also it comes with a scarp.toml, which is the configuration file for a Scarp, for the package manager. Similar to Rust, you're gonna see that Cairo actually looks a lot like Rust. All right, so that going back to the requirements, we are supposed to initialize the project structure. Okay, so we have this first part done. We created the project with the counter name. Now we need to create a new file under the source folder called counter.cairo with this starting code. And this is just the most foundational code that you need to define a smart contract. You can tell that a smart contract is defined as a module. And the module needs to be annotated with certain attribute. This is called meta programming, similar to Rust again. And you can see then saying that, hey, this module is not a regular module. It's actually going to be the smart contract for Starknet. And every smart contract needs to have a storage defined. And the storage is defined with a struct that is called storage, and then also annotated with this attribute storage. So I'm just going to create a file here. Let's call it counter.cairo. And I'm just going to copy this starting code. Oh, we can just write it here. So we start with the annotation, which is Starknet contract, and there's going to be a module called counter. We're going to have a storage that needs to have annotated with this attribute. It's going to be a struct. That's it, right? This is the basic thing you need, at least to compile the project. Let's see what we need. First of all, this file is not being referenced anywhere. We need to make a reference to this particular module. So I'm just going to delete this code here, and I'm just going to reference the counter module that we have there, right? So my lib.char is just going to be having as an entry point for my project. So you can define multiple smart contracts if I have more than one. Next is that, let's see the README. Right. We need to tell Scarp that this is not a regular vanilla Cairo project. It's actually for a smart contract. So we need to make a little modification to our scarp.toml here. And the first one is to define Starknet itself as a dependency. And we use this version because that's the one that comes with the latest Scarp version. So Starknet works as a plugin for Scarp. So all the attributes that belong only to Starknet is going to be available for Scarp, so Scarp will know how to compile it. But then we're going to tell them that the target is actually a smart contract, right? You can find all this information from the Scarp documentation, so you know how it works. This should be all we need to actually now build the project. Now the project is pretty much empty, but at least it will recognize it as a smart contract project. So let's try it out. So to try it, we do scarp build, and it worked, right? So it creates a target folder with the contract class file and some artifacts. But this is the file that we actually gonna care about when we go to deploying the smart contract to testnet. Right, that's step one done. Let's take a look at step two. If you get stuck, every step has some hints. I'm just trying to go faster, so in 30 minutes, trying to show you as much as I can. Okay, so step two, let's take a look. So the goal is to add async forge, and this is the test runner, right? Because from this point on, we're gonna run some tests to verify that we completed the step. So add async forge as a dependency with your scarp.toml file to allow execution or tests within Starknet Foundry. Okay, so first of all, we can verify, as I mentioned before, that we have async forge installed, which is part of the Docker file. So even though the binary is available, we need to let the Scarp knows that where to find all the files, because we're gonna have to import some files for the test to actually work. So to define dependencies, we need to go back to a scarp.toml, and in here we're gonna add async forge. So async forge std. You can name this any way you want. It's just I know this is the way that the tests are expecting it to be called. Oh, I have to switch to the step two. That's one thing I forgot. So git checkout step two. That's why I don't see the tests, which are here. You can see they're just expecting it to be called async-forge std, but you can call it anywhere you want and just modify the import. So we need to define two things. Where the library is located in GitHub. So we use that the keyword git and provide the path. And then using tag, which version in particular of that dependency we want to have available on Scarp. So if I go to my browser and you check for Starknet Foundry, you can see it's here. This is Starknet Foundry. So we can just take this address, go back to the project. So this is going to be the git. And I need to re-add this. And now what tag? So if you remember, we have async-forge 0.23.0. And if we see all the tags in the project, we can see that is this one. It's actually a new one. I need to update. But for now, let's use the one that is available. V0230. So we go here and just define this tag. The other change I'm going to do, I'm just going to create a script. So I'm gonna tell Scarp, hey, when you run the test, I want you to use async because Scarp actually comes with its own test runner, but that test runner is mostly for actually just unit test. If you want to do more like an integration test, when you actually mimic deployment and you can do like a cheat codes and prank and stuff like that, you will need to use async. So I'm just gonna create a script that say, hey, everything that I run test, I actually want you to use async test, right? Which means that if this is correctly, if I do scarp test, it's going to pick up this script and it's actually going to run async in the test suite that is defined by step 2. So yeah, it's working out. It means that we completed step 2 correctly. So we were able to add Starknet Foundry to our project. And basically just, this is how you add any dependency. You can add many more dependencies. Common one is Alexandria for mathematical operations, but there are many more. Dojo could be another one as well. Okay, let's clear. Let's go to step 3. Check out step 3. All right, here we are. Close here. And let's read what the test is all about. All right, step 3. So the goal is to implement the constructor function to initialize an input number and store a variable named counter within the contract. Okay, and it's asking you that this variable has to be an unsigned integer of 32 bits. It of course has to be part of the storage, so it's stored. And we need to have an initializer function to define initial value of the counter. Okay, let's actually now go to back to our counter.cairo. All right, so we're gonna modify the storage. So we're gonna find the first element of storage, which is gonna be the counter variable, and it's an unsigned integer 32. That's it. And we have to initialize it, right? So we need to define a constructor. And so for Scarp to know that this actually needs to be called when we deploy the smart contract, we need to annotate it with the attribute constructor. I think that's the same. And now we need to define, okay, what is the constructor expecting? So the first parameter of the constructor, the first argument that we're going to be expecting is the actual storage of the smart contract. So it can just read and write from it. So, and because it's going to modify the storage, actually it's going to require a reference to be able to modify storage. And that's this type is just contract state. It's always the same type. And it's just, you don't have to import from anywhere. So this is always required so it can interact with the storage, but now we also need to pass what is the initial value of the counter. And this value you will need to pass it whenever you deploy the smart contract, you need to provide that value. So let's call it the init value. And it's going to be also unsigned integer 32, the same as the counter. So we're going to use this value to initialize this storage property here. So to access the storage, we go to self, we access the property counter, and then we use the method write and pass the value, initial value. That should be all that is needed to complete the step. So if we did it correctly, we can do scarp test. Let's see. Oh, errors. All right. Deploy contract is not visible in this context. Utils deploy contract. Oh, okay. I know what's happening. What's happening is that we are using, you can use different editions for Scarp, which basically means how big you want the prelude to be, the prelude to be. This is the small prelude, so it's trying to make the size of the whole program very small. But for testing purposes and for development, I recommend to use a bigger prelude, and then when you're ready to go to production, maybe reduce it. So the bigger prelude that requires me to import less things for it to work is just the one in 01 in January. So with this change, if I try to run it again, it should work because now a bunch of things are going to be just pre-imported by default, right? So it worked. I know there's some questions, but I only have 10 minutes left, I think, so I have to power through a lot of this. Right. So that completes step 3. So you can go now to step 4. And step 4, if we take a look, it says implement an interface for the contract which contains the getCounter function. This function should return the value of the stored counter variable within the contract, right? So it's a way from the outside world to actually read data from a smart contract. What is the current value of the counter? So let's go back to our smart contract. So whenever we have to define or work with a public interface of a smart contract, we have to define a trait. And so let's call it a trait, and just gonna call it iCounter. You can call it anywhere you want. The I is just a convention that I like to use. And also because the test for this section is also expecting to be called iCounter, so any other name will fail. But in general programming, you can call it anywhere you want. This trait actually expects a generic. You're just gonna call it T. Now, I need to tell the compiler that this is just not just a regular trait, it's actually the interface of my smart contract that people can use to call it. So I need to use an attribute that is called a Starknet interface. And now I define the signature of the getCounter function. Counter. And I know that when I call it, it's going to return the counter, which is U32. Now, the first argument is always the contract state. The only question is, do I get it in a way that I can modify it, or I can just read from it? The getCounter, it only is going to read from the state. It's not going to modify it. So in this case, it's going to get a snapshot of T, the generic term, the generic type, which eventually is going to be the contract state once we implement the trait. So now we have the interface. We actually have to implement the interface because we only define the signature. So we do that with another attribute called ABI embed, v0. And now we define implementation for the trait. Let's call it just counter impl. In this case, in this context, the name doesn't really matter. To access that trait in my module, I need to import it. So let's say use super iCounter. So it's available here. So now say implement this of my interface iCounter. I need to provide now the type. It was generic. Now I have to provide the concrete type, which is going to be the contract state, which is the state of a smart contract. And now I have to define an implementation for this method, which I'm going to replace the generic with the concrete type. And basically, I'm just going to read from storage, counter.read. And if I don't put the semicolon, it's just going to return that value, right? So that's all I need. In theory, I should be able to run the test, scarp test. All right, we are completed. I only have a few more minutes, so I'm just going to show you how to deploy in the easiest way that I can think of. Before I can deploy, I want to do a small change here. And the small change is that when Scarp compiles a smart contract, it actually compiles to a language called Sierra. But I also want it to generate not only Sierra, but also the Cairo assembly. So for that, I need to enable this property custom true when it compiles. So now I do a Scarp build, right? So it builds successfully. And now in our target folder, dev, we should have two different files. The contract class, which is the Sierra code, and the compile contract class, which is the Cairo assembly. So multiple ways to deploy. You can use command line or CLIs. You can use SDKs. Or for me, one of the easiest one is to use actually Argent directly. So if you have an Argent wallet, make sure that it's in Sepolia. Is it big enough? Right. And that it's funded. You can use a faucet. So in this case, I have some Stark tokens in this test wallet. You can go to settings and developer settings and a smart contract development, declare a smart contract, and then you define, okay, give me the contract class. So if we go back to, let's see if I'm in the right location. Wait, where am I? Is this the right thing? Forge? No. We go to apps, sandbox. counter workshop. It's in the target. So I need the contract class, this one right here. Yeah, okay, the zoom is actually messing with the UI. And I also have to provide the compile contract class, which is the Cairo assembly, which is this one, compile contract class. I want to say that deploy to Sepolia. I want to use this account to pay for gas fees and declare. What am I missing? Sepolia. Not working. Try again. Let me open this again. Developer settings, smart contract development, declare. I get the contract class. I get the compile contract class. I go to Sepolia and I use this account and I declare and I confirm. Okay, so it did the declaration for me and it gave me the contract class hash. Okay, I need to get it. So now I'm ready to deploy because it's two-step process. You declare and then you deploy. So now for deployment, I'm just gonna copy the class hash that it gave me, define again Sepolia, which account to pay for gas fees. And it's asking me, okay, you're asking to provide an init value for the counter. So let's call it, let's say that's 15, the initial value for the counter smart contract. Let's do a random salt and deploy it, confirm. And that is the address where it was deployed on Sepolia. So to verify that it's actually deployed, you can use something like StarkScan and make sure that it's also in Sepolia. It could take a while to be available because this needs to be indexed, this new smart contract, and which could take a while, but eventually will show up. You can check also with Voyager, another block explorer for Starknet. You go to Sepolia and you go to, where's the, here, search. Yeah, it takes a few minutes to be available. But let's see, one more minute to wait to see if it shows up, Sepolia. No. In the meantime, let's see if questions. There's a bunch of people in the chat talking. Where do I start? Let's start from the end. Starknet does not support the concept of payable address or payable contract. So what can we do to store the funds? Payable address, payables. Oh, I mean, you store the funds. Everything has to be there's no native coin on a Starknet. Everything is ERC20 smart contract, even the Stark token and even the ETH token. So that's why there's no payable, because on Ethereum you have the concept of a native coin, ETH, and then ERC20 tokens. On a Starknet, everything is an ERC20 token. So that's why there's no payable keyword. Let's say, but Victor asking, like Circon, which export the verifier in the Solidity, is there a tool which export the verifier in the Cairo? We have the Stone Prover, which is open source and you can use, and it's the combination of the prover and the verifier that you can use, and you have it here. So you can also use it to just create validity proof on your own and verify it. Let's try one more time to see if this thing shows up. So we can conclude this. Oh, no, taking a while. Let's try again. Stark scan. Yeah, taking longer to index. But anyway, it will eventually show up there. Calling. It's 11:30. Just want to be conscious of the time. Want me to stop? Want me to continue? What should I do?
No, I mean, you can just wrap up and probably we can just open up the session for Q&A for the next 5 minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah,
Do
because
you
I
want
think
to?
there's a lot of questions for you.
Yeah, okay. Let's read the questions.
Yep.
Let's see. Paul is asking, could you please clarify about payable address? So there's no way to create escrow contract with Cairo. I'm not sure if I understand the payable address. I thought you were talking about the payable keyword that you find on Solidity. Right? There's no payable keyword on a Starknet. For sure, it's possible to create escrows on Cairo with a smart contract. It's just keep in mind that every token is an ERC20 token. Even the Stark token is an ERC20. Let me see more questions. going up. Is there a tab in Cairo which is somewhat similar to bytes 32 in Solidity? Bytes 32. I'm not that familiar with Solidity. What is bytes 32 in particular doing? It's like an unsigned bin integer of 32 or like a signed integer? Because if what you want is to create like a just an array of bytes, that is basically the string. We have a string type in Cairo that you can use to create just any size of array of bytes. Sorry. But if you want to
It's
see
an
all the different types,
alternative to the string on the Solidity also, that byte 32.
sorry, say that again.
Uh, Byte 32 is an alternative of storing string on the Solidity, so it totally makes sense.
Oh, okay. Oh, to store a string. Yeah, yeah. So we have a string type in Cairo for that purpose.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, it might not be the question on the workshop, but Cairo looks more like familiar to Rust, and I'm quite comfortable working with the Rust. So
Yeah,
I'm just wondering, like, how we can get the mentor and like talk with him about the feasibility of the project, what we are thinking of. So, and based upon that one, we can create the project and submit the project. So,
right. Yeah, I think to get support, the Discord server is the best place to go. The Starknet Discord. Also, the Cairo book is a great tool to learn all these things. Yes, if you know Rust, it will be much easier to pick up Cairo because they're very similar. But this book teaches everything from the ground up, not assuming that you know anything about Rust or Solidity for that purpose.
okay, got
Uh,
it. And just wondering, like, can we submit like tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, after 13th, we can create a project and submit, or we have to do within a 13th of this month?
to submit a project, yes. I don't know the specifics about the StarkHack. Maybe Calvin can say more. But if you want to discuss ideas, um, we actually have a channel called the Buildcamp. I don't know if you can use that. It's open. This is a place where people are getting together to explore ideas for the hackathon, right? And even to get together to find team members. You can find it in the Discord server on the Starknet Discord server.
Okay, I'll got it. But being a working professional, so it's hard to go and see those things. So just
Yeah.
ask here.
There's also another good resource if you want to learn because I just talk very high level about declaring, deploying, like you have to do all these things, but the reason why you have to do all these things, you can find it here. This is a playlist that we created with a lot of this knowledge about the architecture and how things work under the hood that it could actually be useful for you. I'm gonna put the link in the chat. How do I put it? How do I chat to everyone? Meeting group chat. Yeah, Basecamp self serve. So I encourage people to take a look. The playlist, each video is very short. It's like a minute or two. But it gives you a very good understanding of how Starknet works. And a lot of things that I show here today will make more sense.
And like last question from me, like what is the motivation of using the Cairo instead of other language like Rust or Solidity that is already built in?
The reason is because we want a language to be more flexible because the things I want to build is beyond just even the blockchain. An example of that is the meta programming, the fact that you can define attributes and those things are going to modify code and create new code. That gives you a lot of power. The fact that we have our own package manager as well helps a lot in reusing code. Rust is a very beloved language because of ergonomics, so it makes sense, Cairo, to look a bit like that. It's not exactly Cairo because we need to be also, sorry, it's not exactly Rust because we need to be mindful that the target of the Cairo code is a Cairo virtual machine. It's not your computer, it's not your chip on your laptop, like in the case of Rust. So that comes with some trade-off and thing you have to keep in mind because at the end, the execution of a Cairo program can be proven with a validity proof something you cannot do with Rust, right? So some changes were required. So that's basically why. A good example of how Cairo can evolve thanks to the way it is Dojo. And Dojo is a framework for on-chain games. On-chain games. Dojo engine is called. Yeah, that is basically Cairo, but with additional set of attributes for meta programming, which is just particularly made for creating fully on-chain games on a Starknet using Cairo. So, this extensibility of the language is what allowed to things like that to actually be possible. Let me
Okay,
see if
got
more
it.
question. Could you please clarify about is there something like Remix or Scaffold it for Cairo? Some way to play test? Yes, we have a Scaffold, Starknet, and also Remix supports Cairo. There's a plugin for that. There's two scaffolds. I forgot what the other is. This is one. Oh man, I need to find the other scaffold. But if you go to the Discord server, you will be able to find that information. I just tried to find it and show it here. Oh, there you go. Scaffold Stark. This one here. I'm gonna put the link. Yeah, you can use this to play and learn more. Another way to learn more about Cairo is using Starklinks .app. Another great tool to learn Cairo. And finally, Node Guardians, another fun tool to use. Eh, You can filter by basically Cairo. And yeah, I'm gonna go to home, just share here. It's all fun tools to use. Let's see, more questions.
Sweet. I think we shall be wrapping up in the next 2 minutes. So in
Yeah.
case anyone has any questions for David, feel free to unmute yourself or paste your questions on the chat box and David can pick it up for you.
Yeah.
Cool. I do not see any questions coming in.
Sounds like we're good. You can
Yeah,
find me on
looks
Discord
like
as
we're
well. So
good.
you can tag me there if you have any question. I'll make sure to have a look.
Exactly. Cool. So thank you, David, for joining us today and for the great presentation. As David mentioned, feel free to connect with David in the partner channel on Discord if you have any questions, and they shall get back to you. Thanks everyone for joining in, and see you all for the next.